She was pouring wine for the man who was about to make her worst nightmare rich beyond imagination. He had no idea she existed. He had no idea his $50 million deal was built on stolen dreams. And he definitely had no idea that the quiet waitress refilling his glass was the ghost his business partner thought he'd buried forever. But that night, everything changed, because sometimes the people we make invisible are the ones who end up changing our lives completely. This is the story of how one act of kindness exposed $1 million lie, and how the woman everyone forgot became impossible to ignore. Stay with me, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Sometimes life has a way of making us invisible. Not physically, but in every way that matters. That's exactly what happened to Sophie Bennett, and this is her story. A story about losing everything and finding something even more valuable in the most unexpected place. Picture this: a beautiful restaurant in downtown Chicago called the Sterling Room. Crystal chandeliers hanging from high ceilings, soft music playing in the background, and tables full of people who never worry about paying rent or choosing between groceries and medicine. Sophie worked there as a waitress, moving quietly between tables in her simple black uniform, refilling wine glasses and taking orders with a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was 25 years old, but if you looked closely, really closely, you could see she carried the weight of someone much older. Her hands would shake slightly when she poured expensive wine, not because she was nervous about spilling it, but because each bottle cost more than she made in a month. Every shift was a reminder of everything she'd lost. But here's what made Sophie different from every other server in that restaurant. She was hiding a secret. A big one. Just 3 years earlier, Sophie had been someone completely different. She'd graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in architectural engineering. Yes, architecture. She could design buildings, calculate structural loads, create spaces that were both beautiful and functional. She'd dreamed of changing city skylines, of creating affordable housing that didn't sacrifice beauty for practicality. And for a while, those dreams were coming true. Sophie had worked at a prestigious firm called Summit Design Group. She'd spent 4 years there, pouring her heart and soul into innovative designs. She'd created a revolutionary modular housing system, buildings that could be constructed quickly and cheaply without looking cheap. It was brilliant work, the kind of thing that could actually help solve housing crises in growing cities. She'd also been engaged to a man named Ryan Foster. They'd met at the firm, fallen in love over late nights working on projects together, and built what Sophie thought was a real partnership. Ryan was charming, ambitious, and told her every day that she was the smartest person he'd ever met. She'd believed him. She'd trusted him with everything: her work, her ideas, her future. That trust destroyed her. Ryan had systematically stolen every design she'd created. He'd taken her modular housing system, her sustainable building concepts, even her sketches and notebooks, and filed patents under his own name. When Sophie discovered what he was doing and confronted him, Ryan didn't apologize. Instead, he turned the tables on her completely. He accused her of stealing from the company. He forged documents showing that her designs were actually his work that she'd copied. He convinced their bosses, their colleagues, even their mutual friends that Sophie was the thief. And because Ryan was smooth and convincing and had carefully planned everything, people believed him. Within 2 months, Sophie had lost her job, her reputation, her fiancé, and her entire career. The architectural community was small and word traveled fast. No firm would hire her. Her professional license was suspended during the investigation. Even though the criminal charges were eventually dropped, because there wasn't actual evidence of wrongdoing, the damage was done. Everyone still believed she was guilty. Ryan made sure of that by dropping the charges out of kindness, which only made him look generous and made Sophie look like someone who'd barely escaped justice. So Sophie ran. She left everything behind, moved from Minneapolis to Chicago, and took the only job she could get: waiting tables. She stopped using her real credentials, stopped talking about her education, stopped being the person she'd worked so hard to become. She became invisible by choice because it was safer than being seen. For 2 years, she lived like this. Small apartment in a rough neighborhood, taking the train to work, counting tips, avoiding mirrors because she couldn't stand to see what she'd become. The other servers at the Sterling Room knew her as quiet, reliable Sophie who never complained and never talked about her past. And that's how things would have stayed if it weren't for one particular Tuesday evening in October. Table 15 had been occupied by the same man for 3 months now. James Caldwell. Even his name sounded expensive. He was some kind of real estate developer. The kind of wealthy man who owned half the buildings in downtown Chicago. He always wore perfectly tailored suits, always ordered the same expensive scotch, and never once looked at Sophie like she was an actual person. To him, she was just part of the furniture. But that Tuesday night, James wasn't alone. He'd brought his father. Mr. Caldwell, the elder, was probably in his 70s, with white hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He was dressed simply compared to his son, and there was something gentle about him that immediately caught Sophie's attention. The older man was trying to get Sophie's attention, waving his hand politely and making gestures that Sophie recognized immediately. Her heart nearly stopped. He was signing. He was deaf, and he was trying to communicate using American Sign Language. Sophie glanced around the restaurant. The other servers were busy, and James was on his phone, completely ignoring his father's attempts to communicate. The older man's face showed patient resignation, like he was used to being overlooked, used to people not taking the time to really see him. And something inside Sophie cracked open. Without thinking about staying invisible, without worrying about revealing too much about herself, Sophie approached the table and signed back. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" The transformation on the older man's face was immediate and beautiful. His whole expression lit up with surprised joy, and suddenly Sophie wasn't invisible anymore, to him or to herself. You should have seen the look on that old man's face. Pure delight, like Sophie had just given him the most precious gift in the world. And in a way, she had the gift of being truly seen and heard. His hands moved quickly, gracefully, as he signed back to her. "Oh, how wonderful. I was hoping to ask about the soup today. Is it the mushroom or the tomato bisque?" Sophie smiled, a real smile this time, not the polite server smile she'd perfected. "It's the mushroom, sir. Chef makes it with truffle oil and fresh thyme. It's delicious." "You sign beautifully," he told her, his weathered hands moving with the ease of someone who'd been signing his whole life. "Where did you learn?" "I had a professor in college who was deaf," Sophie signed back, which was true. "She taught me that communication isn't about words, it's about connection." The older man's eyes grew misty. "You sound like someone special. What's your name?" "Sophie." "I'm William," he signed. "And this is my son James, though he's currently more interested in his phone than his father." Sophie couldn't help but laugh softly at that. William had a sense of humor, a warmth that seemed at odds with his son's cold efficiency. But James had noticed their interaction now. He'd looked up from his phone, and he was staring at Sophie with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, definitely. Maybe confusion. Possibly something else. "What's going on here?" James asked, his voice sharp with that edge wealthy people get when something unexpected happens. "Your father was asking about the soup," Sophie said quietly, slipping back into her invisible server voice. "I was just letting him know it's the mushroom." James's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know sign language?" It wasn't really a question. It was an accusation, like she'd been caught doing something suspicious. Sophie felt her defenses rise immediately. "Yes, sir. I learned in college." "What college?" The question came out like a challenge. Sophie's blood went cold. This was exactly what she'd been avoiding for 2 years. Questions about her past, about her education, about who she used to be. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to deflect, to stay invisible. But William was watching her with such kind, interested eyes. And something about the way James was interrogating her made Sophie's spine straighten. "Northwestern," she said clearly. "I studied architectural engineering." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. James was staring at her like she'd just told him she was secretly an astronaut. The other diners nearby had gone quiet, sensing some kind of drama unfolding. "Architectural engineering," James repeated slowly. "From Northwestern. And you're working as a waitress." The skepticism in his voice was thick enough to cut. Sophie felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. Shame that he was right to be surprised, anger that he was treating her education like it was some kind of lie. "Yes," she said simply, not offering any explanation. She didn't know him one. But William signed something to his son, his hands moving firmly, almost scoldingly. Sophie caught the gist of it. "Don't be rude. She's being kind to me." James had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. He cleared his throat. "I apologize. I was unnecessarily harsh." He paused, studying Sophie's face like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. But you have to admit, it's unusual. Northwestern isn't cheap, and architectural engineering isn't exactly a field people leave voluntarily. Sophie felt trapped. Every word out of her mouth was revealing more than she wanted to share, but backing down now would look suspicious. And William was still watching her with such gentle interest, like he genuinely cared about her answer. Sometimes life doesn't work out the way you plan, Sophie said carefully. Sometimes people you trust turn out to be people you shouldn't have trusted. Something flickered across James's face, recognition maybe, or understanding. Someone betrayed you. It wasn't a question, and the way he said it, so matter-of-fact and without judgment, made Sophie's carefully constructed walls start to crumble. My fiancé, she admitted quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. He stole my work and made everyone believe I was the thief. I lost everything, my job, my career, my reputation. Being a waitress isn't what I chose. It's what I had left. The confession hung in the air between them. Sophie immediately regretted saying anything, regretted letting this wealthy stranger see even a glimpse of her pain. But James wasn't looking at her with pity or suspicion anymore. He was looking at her with something that resembled respect. What was your fiancé's name? James asked quietly. Sophie hesitated. Ryan Foster. He works at Summit Design Group in Minneapolis. He's pretty successful now, built his reputation on my stolen designs. James pulled out his phone and typed something. His expression grew darker as he read whatever came up on the screen. Ryan Foster. Registered 17 patents in the last 2 years, all related to modular construction and sustainable design. 17. Sophie felt sick. I only knew about 5. He's been busy, James said grimly. He looked up at Sophie, and his entire demeanor had changed. The cold businessman was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely angry on her behalf. Sophie, I need to tell you something. Summit Design Group just submitted a proposal for one of my company's biggest projects. A proposal featuring modular housing designs that they claim are revolutionary. Sophie's world tilted sideways. What? I've been reviewing their work for the past month, and I'm about to sign a $50 million contract with them. James's jaw was tight. If what you're saying is true, if those designs are actually yours, then Ryan is about to profit from my work again, Sophie finished numbly. Just like he always does. William had been watching this entire exchange, and now he signed something to Sophie that made her eyes burn with tears. Truth has a way of coming out. Sometimes it just needs the right person to listen. Let me tell you something about moments that change everything. They don't always come with warning signs or dramatic music. Sometimes they happen in quiet restaurant conversations between a waitress, a billionaire, and his deaf father who just wanted someone to really see him. James Caldwell wasn't the type of man who made impulsive decisions. You don't build a real estate empire worth billions by acting on emotion. But something about Sophie's story had gotten under his skin, and he couldn't let it go. I need to see your work, James said abruptly, pulling out a business card. The original designs, any documentation you have, anything that proves those patents should have your name on them. Sophie stared at the embossed card, Caldwell Properties, James Caldwell, CEO, and felt panic rising in her chest. Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate the thought, but there's no point. Ryan was very thorough. He made sure there's no evidence linking me to those designs. Was he thorough enough to delete cloud backups? Email drafts? Text message discussions? Digital footprints are harder to erase than people think. James's voice was calm but determined. Sophie, I'm about to give Ryan Foster $50 million for work that might not even be his. I need to know the truth. Why do you care? Sophie asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. You don't even know me. Why would you risk a business deal for a waitress you just met? William signed something, and James translated for Sophie, though she'd already understood. Because my son knows what it's like to have people only see his money, never his heart. And you looked at me tonight like I was a person, not a problem to solve. Sophie felt tears threatening. For 2 years, she'd been invisible by choice, safe in her anonymity. Now these 2 men, strangers really, were offering her something she'd thought was impossible, a chance to fight back. I have some things, Sophie admitted slowly. Backed up on an old laptop. Original sketches, development notes, emails with Ryan discussing the technical details because he never understood the engineering parts. She paused. But Mr. Caldwell, going up against Ryan means going up against Summit Design Group. They have lawyers who cost more per hour than I make in a month. So do I, James said simply. Better ones, actually. The next few days were a blur. James had given Sophie his personal number, and told her to take a few days off from the restaurant. I'm paying your wages, he'd said when she protested. Consider it a consulting fee. Sophie found herself sitting in James's downtown office, which occupied the entire top floor of a building so tall she could see Lake Michigan stretching out like an endless blue mirror. The office was beautiful, all clean lines and natural materials, the kind of space Sophie used to dream about designing. These are incredible, James said, scrolling through Sophie's old files on her laptop. His expression was one of genuine amazement. This modular system, the way you've solved the weight distribution problem, the material efficiency, the aesthetic flexibility. Sophie, this is genius-level work. Sophie felt a flutter of pride, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 2 years. The key is in the corner joints. Traditional modular construction has stability issues, but if you reinforce the connection points with carbon fiber composite inserts that distribute stress across the entire frame, James finished, reading from her notes. Revolutionary. And Ryan Foster is claiming he developed this. He's claiming he developed all of it. Sophie pulled up another file, her hands shaking slightly. Look at the dates. I created these designs 3 years ago. Ryan's patents weren't filed until 6 months after I left the firm. James's jaw tightened. And the similarity between your original work and his patents? Nearly identical. He changed some terminology, rearranged a few diagrams, but the core concepts are mine. All mine. For a long moment, James just stared at the screen. Then he picked up his phone. Jennifer, get me Thomas Wright from Wright & Associates. Yes, now. And clear my afternoon. I need to meet with our forensic accounting team. What are you doing? Sophie asked nervously. Due diligence, James said. If I'm going to accuse Ryan Foster of fraud, I need ironclad proof. We're going to compare your original files with his patents, analyze the metadata, trace the development timeline, and build a case so airtight that he can't lie his way out of it. Sophie felt hope and terror warring in her chest. James, what if we can't prove it? What if Ryan's lawyers are better at covering his tracks than we think? James looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then we'll find another way. Sophie, I've spent 3 days reviewing Ryan's proposal for my housing project. And you want to know what I realized? The technical specifications have gaps. The engineering calculations are superficial. The innovative solutions are explained poorly, like whoever wrote them doesn't actually understand how they work. Because Ryan doesn't understand them, Sophie said quietly. He never did. I always had to explain the technical details to him. Exactly. James leaned forward. A real architect can defend their work, explain their choices, troubleshoot problems on the fly. Ryan Foster might have stolen your designs, but he didn't steal your knowledge. And that's going to be his downfall. Over the next week, Sophie found herself pulled into a world she'd thought was lost to her forever. James's legal team interviewed her for hours, documenting every detail of her relationship with Ryan, every design she'd created, every conversation she could remember. Forensic experts analyzed her old laptop, confirming that her files predated Ryan's patents by months. But the real breakthrough came when James did something Sophie never expected. He invited Ryan Foster to Chicago for a meeting. You want to meet with him? Sophie felt panic rising. James, if Ryan sees me. He won't, James assured her. You'll be in the observation room. But Sophie, I need to see how he presents your work. I need to watch him try to defend designs he doesn't actually understand. And if he can defend them? If he's prepared. James smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Then he's a better actor than I think he is. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. Sophie spent the night before unable to sleep, alternating between hope and dread. William had invited her to dinner at his home, a beautiful brownstone in Lincoln Park, and spent the evening signing stories about his late wife, about raising James alone, about learning that real communication required more than just words. My son sees something special in you, William signed as Sophie was leaving. Not just because you were wronged, because of who you are in spite of being wronged. Don't forget that. Friday morning arrived cold and gray, matching Sophie's mood as she took her position in the observation room adjacent to James's conference room. Through the one-way glass, she could see James sitting calmly at the head of the table, looking every inch the powerful businessman. And then Ryan Foster walked in, and Sophie's entire body went rigid with recognition and remembered pain. Ryan looked exactly the same. Same perfectly styled brown hair. Same expensive suit that probably cost more than Sophie's monthly rent. Same confident smile that had once made her heart skip. Looking at him through the glass, Sophie felt like she was watching a stranger wearing a familiar mask. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for meeting with me personally," Ryan said, extending his hand. His voice was warm, charming. The voice Sophie remembered from late nights working together, from whispered promises about the future they'd build together. That future had been a lie. "Mr. Foster, please sit." James shook his hand but didn't smile. "I wanted to discuss your proposal in more detail. The modular housing system you've designed is impressive." Ryan's face lit up with pride that made Sophie feel sick. "Thank you. I've spent years developing that system. It's going to revolutionize affordable housing construction." "Walk me through the corner joint system," James said casually, pulling up technical drawings on the large screen. "The stress distribution seems innovative." Sophie watched as Ryan's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "The corner joints use carbon fiber reinforcement to distribute weight across the frame structure." "Yes, but how do you prevent thermal expansion issues at the connection points?" James asked. "Different materials expand at different rates. That could cause structural problems over time." Ryan hesitated. "We've accounted for that in the design specifications." "How, specifically?" Sophie could see Ryan starting to sweat slightly. She'd written an entire section in her original notes about thermal expansion, a complex solution involving buffer materials and calculated spacing. Ryan clearly had no idea what that solution was. "The engineering team handled those specific calculations," Ryan said, trying to sound confident. "I can have them send over the detailed specifications." "I'd like to hear it from you," James pressed. "You designed this system, didn't you?" "Of course, but the technical minutiae." "Aren't minutiae at all," James interrupted, his voice hardening. "They're fundamental to whether this system works or fails catastrophically. Any architect who actually designed this would know these details by heart." Ryan's mask was starting to crack. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm implying that I've reviewed 17 patents registered under your name, all filed within 2 years, all representing revolutionary advances in modular construction." James leaned forward. "That's an incredible rate of innovation. Almost suspicious, actually. I have a talented team. You keep mentioning your team, but these patents list you as the sole inventor." James pulled up another document. "I'm curious, Mr. Foster. When you filed patent number US 10234567 for the modular corner joint system, did you happen to notice that identical designs were posted on a private academic server 14 months earlier?" Sophie's heart stopped. She'd forgotten about that academic server, a platform where university researchers shared preliminary work. She'd posted her early sketches there during her final year at Northwestern, before she'd even joined Summit Design Group. Ryan's face had gone pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because my forensic team found those posts. They include detailed engineering calculations, stress analysis, even hand-drawn sketches." James smiled coldly. "They were posted by someone named S.M. Bennett. Do you know who that is?" "I have no idea." "Sophie Marie Bennett," James said clearly. "Graduate of Northwestern University, architectural engineering, summa cum laude. Former employee of Summit Design Group. Your former fiancé." The silence in that conference room was deafening. Sophie pressed her hand against the glass, watching Ryan's face cycle through shock, panic, and calculation. "I don't know what Sophie has told you," Ryan said finally, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "But she's not stable. When she left the firm, there were questions about her work, about whether she'd been taking credit for team projects." "Stop lying." The voice came from the doorway, and it took Sophie a moment to realize it was her own voice. She'd left the observation room without thinking, driven by 2 years of silent rage finally finding its release. Ryan's face went white as he saw her. "Sophie, what are you?" "I said stop lying." Sophie walked into the room, and she was shaking but not with fear. With fury. With the power of finally being able to speak her truth. "Every patent you filed, every design you claimed, every innovation you sold, that's my work. Mine. And you know it." "Sophie, you're being irrational." "Am I?" Sophie pulled out her phone and opened a file. "This is my original notebook from Northwestern. These are my sketches for the modular corner joint system, dated 3 years before you filed your patent. These are emails where you asked me to explain the engineering because you couldn't understand it. These are text messages where you called my designs brilliant and revolutionary. Her voice grew stronger with every word. You stole my work, Ryan. You destroyed my career, my reputation, my life. And you did it all so smoothly, so convincingly, that everyone believed your lies. I never. You falsified documents showing I was stealing from the company when you were the one committing fraud. You convinced everyone I was the criminal when you were the thief. Sophie felt tears on her face, but didn't wipe them away. You made me invisible, Ryan. You erased me like I never existed. Ryan looked between Sophie and James, clearly calculating his options. This is blackmail. You're trying to extort money from me. I don't want your money, Sophie said quietly. I want justice. I want the world to know who really designed those buildings. I want my name on the work that's mine. I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything because someone you trusted decided to destroy you. James stood up, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. Mr. Foster, the deal is off. Effective immediately. And you should know that I've already shared our findings with the Patent Office, the Architectural Licensing Board, and several journalists who are very interested in stories about intellectual property theft. Ryan's face had gone from pale to red with rage. You can't do this. I'll fight you. I'll sue both of you for defamation. With what evidence? James asked calmly. We have Sophie's original work, properly dated and documented. We have your patents that are suspiciously identical. We have testimony from former colleagues who remember Sophie's contributions. And we have the fact that you can't actually explain the technical details of your own supposed innovations. He walked to the door and opened it. My lawyers will be in touch about the fraud investigation. I suggest you get your own lawyers ready. Ryan looked at Sophie with pure hatred in his eyes. And that's when Sophie knew she'd truly won. Not because she'd destroyed him, but because she'd stopped being afraid of him. Goodbye, Ryan, she said simply. And she walked out of that conference room with her head held high for the first time in 2 years. 6 months later, Sophie stood in her new office, watching the Chicago sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The walls were covered with architectural drawings, design awards, and framed articles about Bennett Design Solutions, the firm she'd built from the ground up with James's investment and support. Still can't believe this is real? James's voice came from the doorway, warm and familiar. Sophie turned to smile at him. Some days I expect to wake up back in my tiny apartment, getting ready for another shift at the restaurant. Well, you're awake, and this is very real. James walked over to stand beside her at the window. 3 major contracts in 6 months, 2 industry awards, and a feature in Architectural Digest. I'd say you're doing more than surviving. Because of you, Sophie said softly. James, I can never thank you enough. Stop. James turned to face her, his expression serious. Sophie, I didn't do this out of charity. I did it because what happened to you was wrong, and because your work deserves to be recognized. But mostly, he paused, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. I did it because I couldn't stand watching someone so brilliant dim their own light. Sophie felt her heart skip. Over the past 6 months, something had shifted between them. It had started as professional collaboration, James providing the legal and financial support to help Sophie rebuild her career. But somewhere along the way, through late-night work sessions and weekend meetings and hundreds of conversations, it had become something more. Something neither of them had quite acknowledged yet. There's something I need to tell you, James said quietly. Actually, my father insisted I tell you, and he threatened to do it himself if I kept being a coward about it. Sophie laughed softly. William had become one of her dearest friends over the past months. They met every Thursday for coffee, and he'd taught her advanced sign language while she told him about her design projects. He'd become the father figure she'd never had, kind and wise and endlessly supportive. What did William threaten you about? James took a deep breath. Sophie, when you walked into that restaurant and signed to my father, when you saw him as a person instead of an inconvenience, something changed for me. I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who want something from me. My money, my connections, my influence. But you didn't want anything. You just wanted to be kind. He moved closer, and Sophie's breath caught. Then I learned about what Ryan did to you, and I watched you rebuild yourself from nothing. I saw your strength, your brilliance, your refusal to stay broken. And I realized I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was falling in love with you. Sophie felt tears spring to her eyes. James, let me finish, he said gently. I know the timing is complicated. I know you might not be ready. I know I was basically your boss for the past 6 months, even though you're independent now. But Sophie, I can't keep pretending that I don't feel this way. You've changed my entire life. You've made me want to be better, do better, see the world differently. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. I'm in love with you, Sophie Bennett. Completely, ridiculously, inconveniently in love with you. And I needed you to know that before another day passed. Sophie stared up at this incredible man who had risked everything to help her, who had believed her when no one else would, who had seen her at her lowest and helped her rise again. And she realized that somewhere in the past 6 months, she'd stopped being afraid of trust. I love you too, she whispered. I've been trying not to because it seemed too fast, too complicated, too impossible. But James, you gave me back my voice. You helped me remember who I was before Ryan broke me. You made me believe I was worth fighting for. James's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Can I kiss you? I've wanted to kiss you since that first night in the restaurant when you made my father laugh. Sophie answered by closing the distance between them, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. Not to the home she'd lost, but to something better, something built on honesty and respect and genuine partnership. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. My father is going to be insufferably smug about this, James said, wiping away tears. He's been telling me for months that I was an idiot for not saying anything. William knew. Sophie felt her face heat up. Is that why he kept asking me about my feelings regarding his son? He's been conspiring, yes. Apparently, he decided you were perfect for me about 30 seconds after meeting you. Sophie laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. I love your father. He loves you too. In fact, James pulled out his phone and showed her a text message from William. Did you tell her yet, or do I need to come embarrass you in person? They spent the next hour on James's office couch, talking about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. James told her about growing up with a deaf father who taught him that communication was about connection, not just words. Sophie told him about the girl she'd been before Ryan, the dreams she'd buried, the person she was becoming now. I want to show you something, Sophie said finally, pulling up designs on her laptop. I've been working on a new project, a community center for deaf and hard-of-hearing residents. I want to create a space that's designed from the ground up with visual communication in mind. Better lighting, open sightlines, materials that absorb sound but allow vibration. James studied the designs with growing amazement. Sophie, this is incredible. The way you've thought about every detail. I learned from the best. Sophie smiled. Your father taught me that designing for people means actually seeing them, understanding their needs, creating spaces that honor how they experience the world. He's going to cry when he sees this, James said softly. Happy tears, but he's definitely going to cry. 3 months later, Sophie and James stood together at a groundbreaking ceremony for the community center. William was there too, beaming with pride as Sophie signed a speech about inclusive design and the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt seen and valued. Ryan Foster's legal troubles were ongoing, multiple fraud charges, patent disputes, and a rapidly crumbling reputation. But Sophie barely thought about him anymore. She'd learned that revenge wasn't about destroying the person who hurt you. It was about refusing to let them destroy you. As the sun set over Chicago and Sophie leaned into James's embrace, surrounded by friends and colleagues and William's proud smile, she realized something profound. Sometimes the worst betrayal can lead to the most authentic love. Sometimes losing everything teaches you what truly matters. Sometimes becoming invisible helps you discover who you really are when all the pretense is stripped away. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice isn't just possible. It's the beginning of something even better than what you lost. Sophie Bennett had found her voice again. But more than that, she'd found herself. And she'd found a love that was built on truth, respect, and the kind of partnership that doesn't diminish but amplifies. That, she thought as James kissed her forehead and William signed, "I'm proud of you," was worth more than all the stolen patents in the world. The end of her old story had become the beginning of something beautiful. And Sophie was finally, truly ready to embrace it all.